The Valanthi Empire had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. They controlled 900 star systems. Their war fleets were so large that no one could count all the ships. Every species in the galaxy feared them. Every species bowed to them. The Valanthi believed they were the greatest beings in the universe, and for 12,000 years, no one had proven them wrong. On a cold morning on the planet Valanthos Prime, High Executor Xanthus walked into the Grand Tribunal chamber. Camera drones floated in the air around him. This broadcast would reach every corner of the empire. Billions of Valanthia would watch from their homes. Thousands of slave species would watch from their conquered worlds. And somewhere out there, the humans would watch too. That was the point behind Xanthus. Soldiers dragged a young human girl into the chamber. Her name was Lily Morrison. She was 17 years old. She had brown hair and freckles on her nose. 3 weeks ago, she had been on a ship called the Wandering Star with her family. They were going to start a new life on a colony world. They were farmers and teachers and ordinary, people looking for a fresh start. The Valanthi patrol ships had stopped the Wandering Star in restricted space. They had killed all the adults immediately. That was normal for the Valanthi. Humans were not people to them. Humans were pests, insects, things to be crushed. But they had kept Lily alive. They wanted to make an example of her. Xanthus stood before the cameras and spoke in his cold, proud voice. His gray skin shone under the bright lights. His 4 eyes looked into the camera without any warmth. "Citizens of the Empire," he said, "today we show the galaxy what happens to the human infection. These creatures spread through space like a disease. They take worlds that do not belong to them. They breed without control. They refuse to accept that the Valanthi are their masters." He pointed at Lily, who was forced to kneel on the hard floor. "Look at this thing. Weak, emotional, primitive. They feel pain like we do, but they cannot rise above it. They form bonds with each other, but they cannot protect the ones they love. They dream of reaching the stars, but they will never be worthy of them." Lily raised her head. Her hands were bound in energy shackles. Her face was bruised from the beating she had received, but when she looked into the camera, her eyes were clear. "My name is Lily Morrison," she said. Her voice did not shake. "I am from Earth. My mother was a teacher. My father fixed cars. I had a little brother named Danny. He wanted to be an astronaut." She paused and took a breath. "If you are watching this, please remember that I was real. Remember that we are all real." Xanthus hit her across the face. The sound echoed through the chamber. The cameras captured everything, you see. Xanthus said to the billions watching, "Even at the end, they cling to their feelings. Pathetic creatures." He drew a long ceremonial blade from his belt. The metal gleamed under the lights. Lily looked at the blade, then looked back at the camera. She did not look away. She did not close her eyes. The execution was quick. It was brutal. It was broadcast in perfect detail to every corner of the galaxy. Lily Morrison died at 1427 Galactic, Standard Time at 1428. Everything changed, deep within human space. Across 17 colony worlds and 43 space stations in the crowded cities of Earth, a message began to spread. It moved through military computers and civilian networks. It reached government servers and personal devices. The message was only 4 words long. "Witness protocol is active." Admiral Patricia Holloway received the message on the bridge of her carrier ship, the Relentless. She was a tall woman with gray hair and hard eyes. She had commanded the 3rd Fleet for 15 years, patrolling the border between human space and Valanthi territory. For 60 years, humanity had followed the rules. They had smiled at the Valanthi. They had bowed to the Valanthi. They had accepted their place as a weak and inferior species. Admiral Holloway had been waiting for this day since she was a young officer. She opened a secure Channel 2. The other fleet commanders scattered across human space. "You all saw it," she said. "Witness protocol is active. Operation Reckoning is now authorized." Her voice was calm and steady. "May God have mercy on them, because we will not." Across human space, sealed orders were opened. Officers read instructions that had been written decades ago. Weapon systems that had been officially shut down for years suddenly came back online. Ships that appeared on no list and existed in no database began to move from hidden bases. The Valanthi thought they knew everything about human military power. Their spies had counted every ship. Their analysts had studied every weapon. They had concluded that humanity was no threat. Human ships were slow. Human weapons were weak. Human shields could barely stop a rock. That was exactly what humanity wanted them to believe. At 1431, for minutes after Lily Morrison's death, the first phase of Operation Reckoning began. The Valanthi military station at Korath was the first target. Commander Gregory Dunn had been hiding his ship in the shadow of a dead comet for 3 years. His vessel, the Quiet Knife, was a stealth ship. It did not appear on any official record. Its crew of 112 people had volunteered for a mission that might never come. They had spent 3 years in the darkness of space, waiting at 1432. Commander Dunn received his orders. The attack was silent and fast. 3 precise strikes hit the station's communications, shields, and reactor. The station exploded before anyone could send a distress signal. Across the galaxy, similar attacks happened at the same moment. Hidden ships came out of their hiding places and struck at targets that had been selected years ago. Communications relays went dark. Supply stations were destroyed. Sensor networks went blind. Early warning systems stopped working in 17 minutes. Humanity blinded the Valanthi Empire. High Executor Xanthus was still in the Grand Tribunal chamber, accepting praise from his fellow nobles when the first reports reached him. He ignored them. He thought they were mistakes. He thought they were the nervous complaints of worried officers. Then the second phase began. The human colony worlds had always looked exactly like what they claimed to be: farms, mines, small settlements. The Valanthi had inspected them many times and found nothing dangerous. Basic power plants, simple factories, defensive weapons that could barely fight off pirates. What they had not found was what lay beneath the surface. Every human colony had been built above hidden bases that went miles underground. Inside those bases, secret factories had been working for 60 years. They did not make farming equipment. They made weapons. They made ships. They made everything humanity needed to fight a war. At 1444, 17 minutes after the execution, the surface of the human colony world New Kansas split open. A fleet of warships rose from beneath the wheat fields, the Valanthi. A patrol squadron in orbit had 12 cruisers and 2 battleships. Against normal human forces, this would have been more than enough. They were outnumbered 3-1. Captain Diana Sullivan commanded the lead ship. She had trained for this battle in simulators hidden beneath mountains on Earth. She had memorized every weakness in Valanthi's ship designs. All ships, she announced over the fleet channel. Weapons free. For Lily Morrison, the Battle of New Kansas lasted 9 minutes. Every Valanthi ship was destroyed. The war had begun. The news spread through the Valanthi. Empire like fire through dry grass. Military stations were going dark. Patrol fleets were being destroyed. Communication networks were failing. For the first time in 12,000 years, the masters of the galaxy did not know what was happening in their own territory. On Valanthos Prime, the ruling council gathered in an emergency meeting. These were the most powerful beings in the known universe. They had ruled over 900 star systems. They had crushed rebellions and conquered civilizations. They had never known fear. Now they were afraid. How is this possible? Demanded Counselor Veth, the oldest member of the ruling body. His gray skin had gone pale. His 4 eyes darted around the room. Human technology is primitive. Our intelligence services have confirmed this hundreds of times. High Executor Xanthus stood in the corner of the room. He had executed Lily Morrison only hours ago. He had felt powerful then. Now he felt something cold growing in his stomach. They tricked us, he admitted. His voice was quiet. For 60 years, they showed us exactly what we expected to see, and we believed them. Then we must respond with overwhelming force, said another counselor. Send the home fleet. Send everything. Crush them before this goes any further. But even as they spoke, the situation was getting worse. Across human space, hidden fleets were engaging Velanthia forces. These were not the weak, slow ships that the Empire's spies had reported. These were modern warships, with powerful weapons and strong shields. They fought with tactics the Velanthi had never seen before. On the colony world of New Kansas, Captain Diana Sullivan led her fleet in pursuit of fleeing Velanthi ships. Her vessel moved with speed that should have been impossible for human technology. Her weapons cut through Velanthi armor like it was made of paper. "Command, this is Sullivan," she reported. "New Kansas system is secure. Requesting permission to proceed to secondary targets?" "Permission granted," came the reply from Admiral Holloway. "All units are ahead of schedule. Phase 2 is nearly complete." Diana looked at the tactical display on her screen. Green dots showed human forces advancing across the galaxy. Red dots showed Velanthi ships being destroyed or captured. The map was turning green faster than anyone had predicted, but she knew the real attack had not yet begun. On Earth, in a secret base beneath the Rocky Mountains, Dr. Caroline Hughes sat before a control console. She was 73 years old. Her hair was white and her hands were steady. She had spent 40 years building the weapon that would end the Velanthi Empire. The room around her was filled with machines that hummed with power. Cables as thick as tree trunks ran along the walls. Computer screens showed data that only a handful of people in the galaxy could understand. Dr. Hughes had been a young physicist when humanity first met the Velanthi. She had watched the aliens look at her species with contempt. She had watched humanity bow and scrape and pretend to be weak. And she had decided to do something about it. The Velanthi had technology that seemed like magic. Their ships could cross the galaxy in days. Their weapons could destroy planets. Their shields could stop almost any attack. They had developed this technology thousands of years ago, and they had stopped improving it. Why would they improve something that already made them the most powerful beings in existence? That was their mistake. Dr. Hughes had studied Velanthi technology for decades. She had found something hidden in the way their machines worked, a flaw so small that the Velanthi themselves had never noticed it. Their technology used something called subspace to function. It was like an invisible layer beneath normal space. All Velanthi systems connected to this subspace layer. Dr. Hughes had built a weapon that could attack that connection. Her device could not destroy a Velanthi ship, could do something much worse. It could reach through subspace and turn off every Velanthi ship in the galaxy at the same time. A voice came through her earpiece. It was President William Carter, speaking from the Emergency Command Center. "Dr. Hughes, you have authorization to proceed." She looked at the screen showing battles across the galaxy. Human ships were winning, but the cost was high. Casualty reports were climbing. Velanthi reinforcements were beginning to respond. "Firing in 30 seconds, she announced. "All human vessels should prepare for localized disruption. Duration will be 11 seconds. She began the countdown at 14:58. Exactly 31 minutes after Lily Morrison's death. Dr. Hughes activated the Hughes array. The effect was instant and absolute across the galaxy. Every Velanthi ship lost power. Reactors went dark. Weapons stopped working. Shields collapsed. Life support systems failed. Crew members found themselves floating in darkness, unable to breathe, unable to call for help. The effect lasted only 11 seconds, but 11 seconds was enough. Human ships had been warned in advance. They had switched to backup systems that did not use subspace technology. When the 11 seconds ended, they were ready to fight. Velanthi ships were not. They came out of the blackout dead in space. Their crews were gasping for air. Their systems were struggling to restart. They were helpless. In those 11 seconds, the balance of power in the galaxy changed forever. Admiral Patricia Holloway had positioned her fleets at the edge of the Velanthos system days before the execution. They had traveled through secret routes. They had run silent. They had waited in the darkness between stars. When the Hughes array fired and the Velanthi fleet went dark, she gave the order to advance. The Velanthos system was the heart of the Empire. 7 planets orbited the ancient star. Valanthos Prime was the capital, the center of power for 12,000 years. The system was protected by the largest military force in the galaxy, or it had been before the array. As human ships poured into the system, Valanthi crews were still trying to restore basic functions. Emergency lights flickered on and off. Officers shouted orders that no one could follow. Ships drifted without control. Admiral Holloway spoke to her fleet as they approached the Valanthi defense line. 60 years ago, humanity made first contact with the Valanthi Empire. They looked at us and saw animals. They saw creatures to be conquered and used and eventually killed. They gave us a choice between slavery and death, and we chose slavery. Her voice was hard. We smiled and bowed and called them masters. We let them think we were broken. We accepted their cruelty and their hate, and every single day we prepared for this moment. The first human missiles struck the crippled Valanthi ships. We are not weak, Admiral Holloway continued. We have never been weak. We simply learned that sometimes the greatest strength is the patience to wait. The Battle of Valanthos Prime lasted for hours. It was not really a battle. It was a slaughter. Human ships moved through the helpless Valanthi fleet and destroyed everything that tried to resist. Ships that surrendered were disabled and their crews taken prisoner. Ships that fought back were turned to ash by the time it was over. The greatest military force in galactic history had been reduced to floating wreckage. The Valanthi Empire had fallen in 33 minutes. The Grand Tribunal Chamber on Valanthos Prime had seen many things in its long history. It had seen the crowning of emperors. It had seen the surrender of conquered species. It had seen celebrations of victory that lasted for weeks, just hours. Ago, it had seen the execution of a 17-year-old human girl. Now it would see something that had never happened before. The surrender of the Valanthi Empire. The ruling council sat in their seats. But they no longer looked like the masters of the galaxy. Their gray faces were pale with fear, therefore. Eyes kept glancing at the windows where human warships hung in the sky like angry stars. High Executor Xanthus stood apart from the others. He had not spoken since the battle ended. The blade he had used to kill Lily Morrison still hung at his belt. The communication screen activated, and a human face appeared. Admiral Patricia Holloway looked at the Valanthi rulers with eyes that held no mercy. Her gray hair was pulled back tight. Her uniform was crisp and clean. She looked like what she was. The commander of a victorious army, leaders of the Valanthi Empire, she said. My name is Admiral Patricia Holloway. I am here to accept your unconditional surrender. Counselor Veth tried to keep his voice steady. Cannot expect us to simply give up. The Empire has resources throughout the galaxy. Other fleets will come. You have won a battle, but you cannot win a war against 900 star systems. Admiral Holloway smiled. It was not a friendly smile. Let me show you something, she said. This footage was recorded 2 hours ago. The screen changed to show a battle in space. Human ships surrounded a Valanthi fleet. As the council watched, the Valanthi ships opened fire on the human vessels. The human shields held. This should have been impossible. Valanthi weapons were designed to cut through any shield. Human shields, according to every report, could barely stop small debris. But here on the screen, the evidence was clear. Human ships were taking direct hits and surviving. You are not the only species that can keep secrets, Admiral Holloway explained. For 60 years, we showed you what we wanted you to see. Weak shields, slow ships, primitive weapons, and you believed us because it confirmed what you already thought, that humans were inferior. The footage continued. Human ships returned fire. Valanthi vessels exploded one after another. The battle was over in minutes. This is happening across your empire right now, Admiral Holloway said. Our fleets were positioned at every major system before the attack began. Your communication network is destroyed, so you cannot organize a defense. Your reinforcements are not coming because they are fighting for their own survival. She leaned forward and her voice became harder. In 6 hours, we will have destroyed 90% of your military. Your empire is falling, and there is nothing you can do to stop it. Counselor Veth seemed to shrink in his chair. What do you want? Justice Admiral Holloway replied. For Lily Morrison, it's for the colonists of the Wandering Star, for every human. Your empire has murdered and enslaved over the past 60 years. Her eyes moved to Xanthus. And to make sure this never happens again, we can negotiate terms, Counselor Veth began. No. Admiral Holloway interrupted. You do not understand. I am not here to negotiate. I am here to tell you what will happen. The Valanthi Empire ends today. Your military will be disbanded. Your leaders will face trial for their crimes. Every species you have enslaved will be freed. She paused. And High Executor Xanthus, who murdered a child on live broadcast, will receive the same fate he gave to Lily Morrison. Xanthus finally spoke. His voice was thin and weak. You cannot do this. I am a High Executor. I acted within our laws. Your laws allowed you to murder children, Admiral Holloway said. We do not recognize those laws. We never will. She held up her hand, showing 3 fingers. You have 30 minutes to accept these terms. If you refuse, we will begin bombardment of every military target on Valanthos Prime. 30 minutes. The same time Lily Morrison had to know she was going to die while you broadcast it to the galaxy. The screen went dark. The council chamber was silent. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Counselor Veth spoke in a voice that sounded very old. We have no choice. We must accept. Cannot simply surrender. Another counselor protested. We are the Valanthi. We have ruled this galaxy for 12,000 years. Cannot bow to these creatures. Those creatures have destroyed our fleet, Veth replied. Those creatures have weapons we cannot match. Those creatures have proven that everything we believed about them was wrong. He looked around the room at his fellow rulers. We surrender or we die. There is no other option. One by one, the counselors nodded their agreement. Only Xanthus remained still, his eyes fixed on nothing. Contact the humans, Veth ordered. Tell them we accept their terms. The message was sent. The surrender was official. Within hours, human soldiers landed on Valanthos Prime. They marched through streets that had never known foreign boots. They raised their flag over buildings that had stood for thousands of years. The citizens of the capital watched in shock as the impossible happened before their eyes. The news spread across the galaxy, faster than light. The Valanthi had surrendered. The greatest empire in history had fallen. A species that everyone thought was weak and primitive had brought down the masters of the universe. On conquered worlds across the galaxy, a slave species looked up at the sky and wondered if the stories were true. Many of them did not believe it. They had lived under Valanthi rule for so long that they could not imagine freedom. They had been taught since birth that the Valanthi were invincible. Commander Kevin Walsh led the task force that reached the Orthri homeworld. The Orthri had been slaves for 8,000 years. When his ships appeared in orbit and broadcast the liberation message, the Orthri thought it was a trick. They thought the Valanthi were testing them. It took 3 days to convince them that the nightmare was really over. They had been slaves so long they forgot what freedom means. Commander Walsh reported to Admiral Holloway. Their children are taught that resistance is impossible. They cannot believe what has happened. Show them the recordings, Admiral Holloway ordered. Let them see the Valanthi surrender. Let them see that everything has changed. The recordings spread across the galaxy. The execution of Lily Morrison. The destruction of the Valanthi fleet. The surrender of the ruling council. Species that had known nothing but slavery for thousands of years watched and began to hope, and everywhere the recordings played, people remembered the last words of a 17-year-old girl. 3 weeks after the fall of the Volanthi Empire, the war crimes trials began. The location was the Grand Tribunal Chamber on Valanthos Prime, the same room where Lily Morrison had been executed. The same room where the Volanthi had passed judgment on countless species for 12,000 years. Now the Volanthi themselves would be judged. High Executor Xanthus stood in chains before the tribunal. He wore the same ceremonial robes he had worn on the day of the execution, but now they were torn and dirty. His gray face was thin from weeks in a prison cell. His 4 eyes looked around the chamber with a mixture of fear and disbelief. The judges sat on a raised platform before him. 3 humans. 2 or 3. 1 representative each, from 12 other species that had suffered under Volanthi rule. They had been chosen to represent the victims of the Empire's cruelty. Judge Rachel Martha Henson was the senior human member of the tribunal. She was 60 years old, with short white hair and a face that showed no emotion. She had spent 30 years as a legal scholar, studying the laws of different species across the galaxy. She had been preparing for this moment her entire career. "High Executor Xanthus," she said, "you stand accused of crimes against humanity and crimes against multiple sentient species. The charges include murder, torture, enslavement, and genocide. How do you plead?" Xanthus lifted his chin. Even now, even in chains, he tried to look proud. "I do not recognize this tribunal," he said. "I am a high executor of the Volanthi Empire. Everything I did was legal under our laws. You have no right to judge me." Judge Henson did not react to his words. Her voice remained calm. "The defendant claims he acted within Volanthi law. This is true. Volanthi law did allow the execution of what they called inferior species. Their laws classified humans as vermin, suitable for extermination." She paused. "We reject those laws. We reject the idea that any species has the right to declare another species worthless. And we reject the defendant's claim that following evil laws excuses evil actions." The evidence was presented over the next several days. Recordings of executions Xanthus had ordered. Documents showing the deportation of human colonies to labor camps. Testimony from survivors who described the horrors they had witnessed that the recording of Lily Morrison's execution was played for the tribunal. The entire chamber watched in silence as a 17-year-old girl spoke her final words and faced death with courage. Many of the judges wiped tears from their eyes. When the evidence phase ended, Xanthus was given the chance to speak in his own defense. "I was doing my duty," he said. "The humans were in restricted space. Our law required their punishment. If I had not carried out the sentence, someone else would have. I was simply following orders." Judge Henson leaned forward. "You were not simply following orders. You chose to broadcast the execution to the entire galaxy. You chose to make it a spectacle. You chose to mock a dying child." Her voice remained steady, but her eyes were hard. "You did not kill Lily Morrison because you had to. You killed her because you enjoyed showing your power. You killed her to send a message that humanity was beneath you." She sat back. "The message was received, but not the way you intended." The verdict came after 2 days of deliberation. Guilty on all charges. The sentence was death. Xanthus was executed in the same manner he had killed Lily Morrison. The execution was broadcast to the same galaxy that had witnessed his crime. He did not face his death with courage. He begged and pleaded until the end. But the trials did not stop with Xanthus. Hundreds of Volanthi officials faced judgment for their actions. Military commanders who had ordered massacres, government officials who had managed slave labor camps, scientists who had performed experiments on living beings from conquered species. Some were executed. Many more were sentenced to work in the reconstruction of the worlds they had destroyed. The punishment was designed to fit the crime. Those who had caused suffering would now work to undo it. On Earth, the public watched the trials with mixed emotions. There was satisfaction in seeing justice done. There was relief that the war was over. But there was also something else. A quiet worry about what humanity had become. Dr. Caroline Hughes, the woman who had built the weapon that ended the Empire, refused all honors and medals. When President William Carter visited her facility to thank her personally, she was polite but distant. "I built a weapon that could kill billions of beings with the push of a button," she said. "That is nothing to celebrate." "You saved humanity," the president said. "I helped destroy an empire," Dr. Hughes corrected. "That is not the same thing. What matters now is what happens next. The rebuilding, the peace. That will determine whether what we did was worth the cost." She looked at the screens in her facility. They showed Valanthi prisoners being processed, Valanthi ships being taken apart, Valanthi worlds being occupied by human forces. "We must be careful," she warned. "It would be very easy to become what we destroyed." The president nodded slowly. "What do you suggest?" "Do not rule them as they ruled others. Do not take revenge beyond justice. Do not let our victory make us into the kind of beings who would execute a child on live broadcast to prove their power." Dr. Hughes met the president's eyes. "We won because we were patient. Now we must be wise." Her words were reported across the galaxy. They became part of the story. The scientist who built the weapon that ended the Empire had warned against becoming the next empire. Many humans agreed with her. They argued that humanity should not occupy Valanthi worlds forever. They argued that the trials should focus on leaders, not ordinary citizens. They argued that justice should not become vengeance. Others disagreed. They wanted the Valanthi to suffer as humanity had suffered. They wanted payment for 60 years of humiliation and fear. They wanted the galaxy to know that attacking humans had consequences. The debate would continue for years. But in the end, Dr. Hughes's view won out. Humanity did not become the new Valanthi. They chose a different path. The decision was not made because humans were naturally good. It was made because they remembered what they had fought against. They remembered the cruelty of rulers who saw other beings as inferior. They remembered the casual brutality of an empire that executed children for entertainment. And they remembered the last words of Lily Morrison. "Remember that we are all real." Those words became a guide, a reminder, a warning against becoming the thing they had destroyed. The galaxy was watching to see what humanity would do with its victory. For the first time in 12,000 years, the future was not controlled by the Valanthi. It was controlled by a species that had hidden in the shadows, biding its time, waiting for the moment to strike. Now that moment had come. And every decision humanity made would shape the galaxy for generations to come. 5 years had passed since the fall of the Valanthi Empire. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Old powers had fallen. New alliances had formed. And a species that had once been considered weak and primitive now stood at the center of galactic affairs. The Galactic Council met for the first time on a space station built in neutral territory. Representatives from 347 species filled the Great Hall. There were beings with scales and beings with feathers. There were creatures that breathed methane and creatures that lived in the cold vacuum of space. There were species that had been free for millions of years and species that had been slaves just 5 years ago. And there were humans. Admiral Prisha Holloway had retired from military service after the war. She had commanded the fleets that destroyed the Valanthi Empire, but she had no desire to rule what she had conquered. Instead, she had accepted the position of ambassador, representing humanity on the new council. She stood before the assembly to give her first official address. The chamber fell silent. Every eye, every sensor, every form of perception focused on the human woman who had brought down the greatest empire in galactic history. 5 years ago, she began, a young human girl named Lily Morrison was executed by the Valanthi Empire. They killed her to show the galaxy that humanity was weak. They killed her to prove that they were powerful. They killed her to send a message. She paused, looking around the vast chamber. They succeeded. A message was sent, but it was not the message they intended. She took a breath. The galaxy expects us to become the new Valanthi. They expect us to use our power as the Valanthi used theirs. They expect us to conquer and exploit and dominate. Her voice grew stronger. We refuse. Humanity did not spend 60 years preparing for war so that we could replace one empire with another. We did not sacrifice and suffer so that we could become the oppressors. And she looked directly into the cameras that were broadcasting her words across the galaxy. We fought for the right to exist as equals. We fought for freedom, not just for ourselves, but for everyone. And we will not betray that fight now that we have one. The speech was met with uncertainty. Many species had lived under Velanthi rule for so long that they could not imagine any other way. They expected humanity to take control. They expected new masters to replace the old ones. But humanity backed its words with actions. Human forces withdrew from occupied territories within 2 years. Technology was shared freely with any species that requested it. Trade agreements were negotiated fairly, without the threats and manipulation that had characterized Velanthi diplomacy. When disputes arose between species, humanity offered mediation, not domination. The galaxy slowly began to believe. On the 5th anniversary of Lily Morrison's death, a memorial was dedicated on Velantho's Prime. The Grand Tribunal Chamber, where she had been executed, had been converted into a museum. The exhibits documented the crimes of the Empire and the liberation that followed. Visitors from hundreds of species walked through the halls, learning about the darkness that had ruled the galaxy and the hope that had replaced it. At the center of the museum stood a simple statue. It showed a young woman with brown hair and freckles on her nose looking up at the stars. Her name was carved into the base: Lily Morrison, daughter of Earth. Her courage sparked a revolution. Danny Morrison spoke at the dedication ceremony. He was 22 years old now. He had been 13 when his family left for the colony mission. He had been staying with relatives on Earth when the wandering star was captured. He had watched his sister's execution with the rest of humanity. He stood before the statue of his sister and spoke to the crowd that had gathered. "My sister was not a soldier," he said. His voice was steady, though tears ran down his face. "She was not a politician, or a scientist, or a warrior. She was just a person, a regular person who wanted to help animals and see new worlds and live her life." He looked at the statue, at the face of the sister he would never see again. But when she faced death, she did not beg. She did not cry. She looked into the camera and asked the galaxy to remember that she was real, that we are all real. He paused to wipe his eyes. The Velanthi thought they were showing humanity's weakness. Instead, they showed our strength. He stepped back from the podium and looked around at the crowd. Humans and aliens stood together. Species that had been enemies for thousands of years now shared this moment of remembrance. My sister's death started a war that changed everything. But I do not want her to be remembered only for the war. I want her to be remembered for what she said in her final moments. His voice broke slightly, then steadied. "Remember that we are all real." He placed his hand on the base of the statue. "Remember Lily Morrison?" The words spread across the galaxy and became a motto for the new era. Remember that we are all real. Remember that every species has value. Remember that every individual matters. Remember the cost of forgetting these truths. In the years that followed, the galaxy faced new challenges. Old conflicts surfaced again. New threats emerged from the darkness between stars. Building peace among hundreds of species proved harder than winning a war. But the lesson of the 33-minute war was never forgotten. The lesson that patience can defeat power. The lesson that the weak can become strong. The lesson that a single act of cruelty can bring down an empire that seemed eternal. Dr. Caroline Hughes lived long enough to see the new Galactic Council celebrate its 10th anniversary. She was 83 years old by then, frail but still sharp. When reporters asked her how she felt about her role in history, she gave the same answer she always gave: "I built a weapon. Anyone could have done that with enough time and knowledge. What matters is what came after. The peace. The cooperation. The decision not to become the thing we destroyed." She smiled slightly. "That is the real victory. Not the war. The peace." She died 2 years later, surrounded by her family. Her funeral was attended by representatives from over 100 species. The woman who had built the weapon that changed the galaxy was remembered not for her weapon, but for her wisdom, and across the galaxy, in schools and homes and gathering places on thousands of worlds, the story was told again and again. The story of a young girl who faced death with courage. The story of a species that waited 60 years for justice. The story of an empire that fell in 33 minutes because it underestimated the wrong people. The story always ended the same way. Remember that we are all real. Remember Lily Morrison. Remember that the greatest empires can fall when they forget the value of a single life, and remember that humanity, once dismissed as weak and primitive, had proven something to the galaxy that would never be forgotten. Patience is not weakness. Preparation is not cowardice. And those who wait in darkness, nursing their strength and hiding their power, can shake the foundations of the universe when the time is right. The Valenthi. Learn this lesson in 33 minutes. The galaxy would remember it forever.